This is part 4 of the twin stick conversion for a Suzuki Sidekick or a Geo Tracker. And as part of the conversion, we have to remove a detent ball that is right in between the two shift levers inside the housing. There's a shift lever right under both of these bolt heads. The one that runs right along in here is the high range, neutral, and low range. And the one that's under this bolt head running here is for your two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive. And there's a little ball that runs right between the two levers that has to come out. Otherwise, I think it'll end up locking up on you if you try and use the twin sticks while it's in there. So I'm going to go ahead and take this apart, show you how it's done, and then we'll go from there. So the first thing that we have to do is remove the shift lever and all of its internal components that are inside this little housing. Okay, so that's pin number 1. And keep in mind, there's a spring inside of here. So when this starts to come loose, it can come flying out at you. It's actually under quite a bit of tension. Probably not enough it's going to do any serious damage unless you get hit in the eye. But I guess I should pop this loose first. Got a little ahead of myself and I've already knocked this little band loose. So once you got that band off of there, you can just pop the boot off and move it out of your way. And the spring is going to be under this little fitting here. So that's what you got to watch out for when you take this second pin out. Okay, I know it's getting close, so I'm going to push in on this to take a little bit of pressure off of this pin. And then I'll slowly let it out. And out comes most of the mechanism. And if you notice, looking at these pins right here, I'm not sure what the millimeter is, but I measured it out to 0.238. That's a locator pin, and it keeps the shifter lined up by staying in this groove. When I go to install the twin sticks, these pins are going to come into play, so you'll see that on the next part of the video. Now there's a little ring in here that it's dished. And that's what the shifter rides on when you're using the standard shifter, so that needs to come out as well. The next thing that we need to do is to remove the shifter housing by removing these 5 bolts. So I had a little difficulty getting this pried off. I tried getting under here and prying lightly and it didn't quite come loose. So I went ahead and I grabbed the hammer and I just gently tapped here a few times and suddenly it just popped off. The detent for the high-low notch now needs to come out. So we take off this big bolt up here. And, well, I got lucky. The little spring inside of it stayed with it. And then you got to reach in with a magnet and pull out this funny little detent. It's not a ball. It's actually kind of a pin with a rounded end on it. And when you're doing the twin stick, this will not go back in. It's not necessary anymore. This bolt needs to go back in. It doesn't really serve much of a purpose now, except it just helps keep water out of the system. Now, this little pin right here has to be driven out. It holds the little notch mechanism on the end of the shaft. This is again the high-low neutral shaft that runs from here all the way through the case, and we have to pull that completely out in order to get to that little detent ball in there. So I'm going to go ahead and knock this pin out, make sure I don't lose it inside there, and then we'll go from there. And there is enough room in there that that pin just drops out the back once you drive it all the way through. There it is. So now you can see that this selector mechanism, it's able to move back and forth on the shaft. Now the four-wheel drive indicator switch and the detent ball need to come out. Now the top bolt, spring, and detent ball need to come out. And this is another one where it's under pressure, so watch out when you're getting it close. Of course, that spring's got to be a little bit of a bugger. Okay, that's not going to work. Okay, and carefully tip it to get the ball out. There we go. Now for the big scary part. This whole forward section of the case has to come off in order to be able to pull the shaft out. So there's 9 bolts along in here that all have to come off. And I believe this has to come out as well. It's a little retaining clip that holds this shaft in place. So I'll go ahead and take those off and we'll get going on it. Oh, come on. Okay, there we go. So that bolt, little clip slides out. Let's go ahead and separate the forward section from the main case. Now you want to pay attention here. And make sure that when this shaft pops off, that you note the position of the spacer here. See little notches that are on this side? There are no notches on that side, they're only on this side. And those notches, they need to go so that they're facing the gear. And you also want to watch out because there's a little detent ball here. And you don't want to lose that because that keeps this washer stationary while the gears are running inside the transfer case. And you also want to make sure that this gear doesn't pop out too far because there's also another retaining ball down on the inside here, and it's real easy to lose that, and it's also keeping a washer on the other end so that it doesn't rotate with the gears. It's part of the lubrication system, so it's important that all that stuff is in place. Okay, so I guess I got a little ahead of myself. I didn't realize you had to also pull this one too so that you can move the two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive shaft back and forth a little bit. If you don't take that out, you can't move this shaft easily, and you have to move this shaft back just a little bit so that you can pull out the other shaft. There we go. So go ahead, pull the shaft out all the way, and make a note that when this collar comes out, the side with the line on it faces inwards when it goes back into place. If you get that backwards, your transfer case is not going to work. So the detent ball is right in between where the two shafts right inside the case here. And so once you have this upper shaft removed, you have to reach in there with a magnet and just keep slowly feeding it in, and eventually you'll hear a little click when the ball pops up and attaches to the magnet, and then you just pull it on out. Whoop. That wasn't it. So I'm going to have to fish that magnet out of there. I guess if I had a proper retrieval magnet, it'd probably make it a little bit easier. So let's try again. Step. All right. Oh, there it is. And all that trouble for that little guy. So the shift lever and the collar go back into place. And again, note that the side that has that little groove in it faces inwards. Okay. Gotta get this thing here, this little shift mechanism. Gotta get that back somewhat on so that I can get the shaft to go in the rest of the way. Ah! Okay, let's try that again. Okay, come on. There we go. And put your bearing back on. I've spared you the tedium of watching me clean and prep this case to be put back together again. What I've done is completely clean all the old gasket material off of both sides. You know, here and on the front case cover. And then I went around all of the clean surfaces with denatured alcohol just to remove any oil or anything that might be left behind that would cause a bad seal. And then I took some gray RVT sealer and just put a very thin layer all the way around. And you know, I've said this in previous videos, but I feel it's important to restate this. Anytime you have these really flat mating surfaces, thinner is always better with the gasket, you know, with the RVT gasket sealer. If you get it too thick in there, sometimes it doesn't compress down all the way when you bolt it down, and then later on some of that can work out of the seam and then you get a big leak. So just a real paper thin coating of the sealer on both sides of the case, and that's all the more that you'll need. So I'm now going to join the cases back together. And once again, you want to make sure that this big spacer is on in the correct direction so that you have these two notches facing towards the gear. And you also want to make sure that that little notch, see that right there at the top, there's a little detent ball in the back of this shaft, and that has to line up and go down over the top of that ball. And as you're putting it together, you just want to be real careful and make sure that you don't jog that loose. Okay, so all I need to do now is just bolt it down. So some of the more observant of you out there will probably notice that I'm missing a bolt just up here on this part. That doesn't really matter so much right at this point. I have no idea where it went to. I mean, obviously it's around here somewhere, but I can't find it. But before this transfer case goes into my tracker, I'll find another bolt and make sure that gets put in. So now I'm going to put this little retaining clip back in place onto this little shaft here. And I guess I should have stated this earlier, but you need to make sure that this shaft here doesn't rotate out of position too far. When you're pulling the case out and putting it back in, there's only one notch that basically runs right here, and that has to be lined up for this little keeper to hold it in place. Now we have to put these two detent mechanisms back into place. So I'll put one of the medium-sized bearings, or ball bearings, back in, the spring, and the little cap. So now we put the detent ball and four-wheel drive switch back into place. And what this little switch does here, it activates that little light up on your dash that tells you when you're in four-wheel drive. Okay, so the last thing that we need to do for this part is to put this little pin back into place.